Before we begin, there are some announcements that we always have to make. First of all, if anyone is carrying a mobile phone, now is a very sociable time to turn it off. And scramble up the front. Okay. Thank you. Also, as we go about from place to place, we are obliged... Did you get my message? As we go about from place to place, we're obliged by the law to ask everyone to keep a close watch on their personal belongings, okay? Dublin is generally a nice, friendly, honest place with lots of nice, friendly, honest people. That always gets the first laugh of the evening. That's you. Yes. It is. Well, look at that face, the face that sank 1,000 pints and launched 1 million hangovers, but couldn't cure any of them, unfortunately. But there's an element of professional thieves, I'm afraid to say, in the city, and well, they look like us as well. So be extra careful. The next announcement is much nicer than that. For your added entertainment throughout the evening, we have a literary quiz for you. The announcement about the thieves got a better response than that. I'll try that again with a bit of panache. It's a word I learnt last week. For your added entertainment throughout the evening, we have a literary quiz for you! Well, don't overdo it. If anyone is worried about the quiz, don't. It's a very simple quiz. I know it's simple because we thought it up. All by ourselves, so it couldn't possibly be difficult. And the reason for it is not to test you in any way. It's to make sure that you're paying attention to what we're doing. And the form it takes is that after the pieces we perform for you, we'll ask you a simple question or two based on the piece. And if you know the answer, simply keep it to yourself. I said it was simple. Because in order to let the excitement mount throughout the evening, and it always does, we hold all the questions back until the end, and then provided we can remember the questions again, we ask them again. And whoever answers the most questions will win. Ta-da! Impressed or what?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
What?
Yeah.
One of Jessica's old t-shirts. Did you wash that? Just the front. That's all they'll see. That's fine. That's not true. It's a t-shirt given to us by Jameson Ireland Limited, makers, I need hardly tell you, of the finest whiskey in the universe.
Yes. We'll agree to that.
Thank you. The rest of you are all from Scotland, all of a sudden. Tennessee or Kentucky, all right. They're also our sponsors. Yeah. Now, if you don't win the t-shirt, boo, and that's practically all of you. Don't worry too much. We're giving a couple of other prizes away that you may be more interested in. On my right, the infamous Jameson mouthwash. Some clear candidates in the field for that already. Not to be outdone by the even more notorious Jameson aftershave. Especially for the ladies. My own personal favourite was the all-over body lotion. But we ran out of that during the week, sorry about that. We'll be going to 4 pubs altogether, including this one, so you won't be too drunk or too sober. If anyone has seen our literature, there's a list of about 10 pubs I think there, but if we went to 10 pubs every night we did this, we probably would not be standing here talking to you tonight for obvious reasons. There also wouldn't be enough time for performance, which is the main point of the evening. It is a literary pub crawl and there is a high literary content to it, so if you're only here for the pubs and the beer, you have to put up with some of the literature as well. No, you do. Is that a deal?
Yes, yes.
I take that as a resounding and enthusiastic yes, okay. Jessica and I are professional actors here in Dublin. We're literary enthusiasts. We're not academic experts or anything like that. So if anyone has any very difficult questions that occur to you throughout the evening, we would appreciate it enormously if you'd ask someone else about it. That's our disclaimer for the night. However, we always begin the pub crawl with a song because Dublin has a great tradition of street balladeering and singing, as well as a great tradition of drinking, and appropriately it's a drinking song. Jessica will tell you all about it.
Thank you. This is a song called the Waxies Dargle. Now that may sound like an exotic disease, but in fact the Waxies was the name of the old candle makers of Dublin. And the Dargle is a river in County Wicklow where the Waxies used to go for their annual day out. So the term Waxies Dargle came to mean a night out, lots of drink, lots of song and all the rest of it. Now very conveniently Dargle rhymes with gargle. So it naturally evolved into a drinking song. And like most drinking songs, it's got a very simple little refrain with which you all have to join in. I'll be happy to hear it. When I sing, "Oh, what do you have?" you sing, "I'll have a pint." Think you can manage that? Yeah? Some of you have been saying a little else since you've been in Dublin? Okay, I think you better have a rehearsal. "Oh, what do you have?" "I'll have a pint." Not bad, not bad. Just one rule, pick a key. Any key. Just make it sound like you're thirsty. Says my old one to your old one, will you come to the Waxies Dargle? Says your old one to my old one, sure I haven't got a farthing. I went up to Monto town, see Uncle McArdle, but he wouldn't give me half a crown to go to the Waxies Dargle. What do you have?
A pint.
I'll have a pint with you, sir, and if one of us doesn't order soon, we'll be thrown out of the boozer. Says my old one to your old one, will you come to the Galway races? Says your old one to my old one, for the price of me old lad's braces. I went up to Capel Street to see the money lender, but he wouldn't give me a couple of bob for me old lad's rent suspenders. What do you have? I'll have a pint with you, sir, and if one of us doesn't order soon, we'll be thrown out of the boozer. Says my old one to your old one, we have no beef or mutton, but if we go to Monto town, we might get a drink for nothing. Here's a piece of good advice I got from an old fishmonger. When your food is scarce and you see the hearse, you know you've died of hunger. What do you have? I'll have a pint with you, sir, and if one of us doesn't order soon, we'll be thrown out of the boozer. Well done.
So what do we do?
Let's not do anything. It's safer.
Nothing to be done. Shall we go then?
Yeah, let's go.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That, of course, was from Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, a play in 2 acts, and when it was first reviewed after its opening night in Paris, one reviewer wrote that it was the only play he'd ever seen in which nothing happened. Twice. Your first couple of quiz questions of the evening concern Beckett, and please don't shout out the answers in your enthusiasm. Wait till you've forgotten by the end. It's much more fun that way. Beckett was born on a rather interesting day in 1906, and critics often wondered if this had any influence on his work. It's a holy day, close to Easter, and we want you to guess, on what day was Samuel Beckett born? Not the date, just the specific day. He was also a co-writer on the 1960s musical O Calcutta, but when he saw the show in rehearsal, over the piece that he had written, he also saw 6 naked women walking around the stage, and he couldn't remember writing about them at all. So in disgust, he withdrew his work from the show. When another writer heard that news, he also withdrew his work. That happened to be one of the Beatles. And we want you to guess which of the Beatles was originally a writer on O Calcutta. There were only 4 of them. If you don't know the names of the Beatles yet, frankly, you don't deserve a t-shirt. However, we begin the pub crawl on this street for several reasons, both literary and historical, many of which have to do with the building just across the street from us, the red brick building there. It's number 18 Duke Street, but up to the early years of the 20th century, it was Burton's Bar and Restaurant, a very famous establishment in Dublin. It's into Burton's that Mr. Leopold Bloom, the central character of James Joyce's second novel Ulysses, goes on the 16th of June 1904, the original Bloom's Day as we now call it. He goes in for lunch, but he becomes nauseated by the smell of boiling meat, and as Joyce puts it, the beery, pissy men slopping in their stews and pints. So he turns vegetarian on the spot, and he walks a few yards up the street to Davy Byrne's Moral Pub, so called because the owner at the time, a man called Davy Byrne, sold alcohol but never touched a drop of it himself, thus maximising his profits very, very nicely. Mr. Bloom orders a gorgonzola cheese sandwich and a glass of burgundy, which in those days he got for 7D, 7 old pennies and very old money. Now you could have got it last June 16th as well at Davy Byrne's for about €18 or something equally ridiculous. But the establishments on the street were also favourite haunts of Charles Stewart Parnell, the most influential Irish politician of the late 19th century. He had a huge influence on the young Joyce because Joyce's father, John, was an election agent for Parnell's Irish Party, as it was called, which held the balance of power in the British House of Commons right throughout the 1880s. and Parnell was seen to be responsible for the downfall of 2 Liberal Party administrations. And when a huge divorce scandal broke because of his love affair with a married woman called Mrs. Catherine O'Shea, or Kitty as she was known to her enemies in those days, the Liberal Party saw it as an ideal opportunity to take revenge and settle old political scores, which they did with great relish, ably assisted, it must be said, by the Irish Catholic Church, who did not want an adulterer to become known as the uncrowned King of Ireland, something that ordinary people were beginning to call Parnell. Now, this combination succeeded in destroying Parnell's political career. He then succeeded in destroying his health with a long series of disastrous by-election meetings throughout the country during the very cold winter of 1890 to 91. He was trying to prove that he still had the mass popular support among Irish people that he had once commanded. He was proved wrong. The effort broke his health, and he died in October of 1891 at the age of 45. At that point, the young Joyce was just 9 years old, and he remembers the time specifically in his first novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which he first published in the United States in 1916. And in that book, there's a very famous passage or scene, the Christmas dinner scene we like to call it, in which the young Stephen Dedalus, an alias for James Joyce, comes home at Christmas of 1891 for his school holidays. His school was Clongo's Wood College, a very famous Jesuit college in County Kildare, about 25 miles west of Dublin. He paints a very idyllic picture of a typical Irish family Christmas gathering, but also present at the table, apart from the immediate Joyce family, is a man called Mr. Casey, a very strongly nationalist kind of character and a staunch Parnell supporter, and it's just a couple of months after Parnell's death, so that's obviously still a very strong topic of conversation. He proceeds to tell a rather disturbing story based on an incident that took place at one of Parnell's last great meetings before he died. The meeting was at Arklow in County Wicklow, and the story illustrates the bitter divisions existing in Irish society at the time. He tells the story specifically to annoy another person seated at the table, and that's a woman called Mrs. Reardon. Now, she was the aunt cum governess of the Joyce family, responsible for the religious education of the children. She's also called Dante in the book, and she's called Dante because the Joyce family originally came from County Cork in the southwest of Ireland, and down there, in their nice sing-song accent, they often refer to the aunt of the family as Dante! And Joyce realised this sounded very much like the name of his favourite Italian poet, so Dante she remained. But she was an interesting woman in her own respect. As a young woman, she wanted to become a nun. So she went off to the United States and she joined a convent somewhere in the Allegheny Mountains. But shortly before she took her final vows, she heard that her brother had died prospecting for gold in Africa and had left her £30,000, a considerable fortune in the 19th century. And she suddenly realised that, well, maybe she didn't really want to be a nun after all. she came back to Ireland with the intention of finding herself a husband. And with £30,000 being what it was, and men being what they are, she had no problems whatsoever finding a husband. But the one she chose turned out to be, shall we say, a bit of a gold digger himself. He ran off to South America with all the money, but without the unfortunate Mrs. Reardon. And this turned her against any man she thought was involved in a dishonourable relationship with a woman. Hence she turned against Parnell and Catherine O'Shea, though their circumstances were entirely different. Mr. Casey is fully aware of her history. He tells his own tale simply to annoy her because they've become bitter enemies because of the whole Parnell situation. We take up the story in the eyes of the young Stephen Dedalus, watching the adults growing progressively louder and drunker.
Plum turkey is filed to pay the guinea for and Duns into Lear Street. Take that one, sir. That's the real Ali Daly. Clongowes was far away, and the warm, heavy smell of turkey, ham and celery rose in the plates and dishes. And the green ivy and the red holly made you feel so happy. And the big plum pudding would be carried in, studded with peeled almonds, with a sprig of holly and a bluish fire running round it, and a little green flag flying from the top. It was his first Christmas dinner. And Mr. Casey, tapping the gland of his neck and smiling with sleepy eyes, as he took the glass with 3 cramped fingers he got, making a birthday present for Queen Victoria.
Tell me, Simon, did I ever tell you the story about the very famous spit? The story is very short and sweet. It was one day down on Arklow, a cold, bitter day, not long before Parnell died, may the Lord have mercy on his soul. We were down there at a political meeting, and when the meeting was over, we had to make our way to the railway station through a very hostile crowd. Well, such booing and bang, man, you never heard the like of in your life. They called us every name under the sun. Now there was one old lady there, and a drunken old harridan she was surely, who paid all her attention to myself. She kept running along beside me in the mud, screaming and bawling up into my face, "Priest hunter! Prepare the funds! Mr. Fox, Kitty O'Shea! I let her bawl away. It was a cold day, and to keep my heart up I had, saving your presence, ma'am, a quid of Tullamore tobacco in my mouth. And sure I couldn't say one word in any case, as my mouth was full of tobacco juice. I let her bawl away, Kitty O'Shea, and all the rest of it. But at last, she called that lady a name, that I won't sully this Christmas board, not indeed your ears, ma'am, nor my own sacred lips by repeating it. She stuck her ugly old face up at me when she said it, and I had my mouth full of tobacco juice. I just bent down to her and says I to her like that, says I to her just like that, straight into her face. Ah, Jesus, Mary and Holy St. Joseph, she screamed. I'm blinded, and I'm drowned. I'm blinded entirely. But you know something, ma'am? She was too, God bless her. Happy Christmas.
But the next stop was a drink stop without any culture. Okay, that's too carried away. This is Trinity College, which James Joyce once described as the grey block of Trinity set heavily in the city's ignorance, like a dull stone set in a cumbrous ring. I'm not going to try and beat that one, so you just have to remember that for yourselves. Trinity was founded in 1592 on the orders of Queen Elizabeth I of England, who said that our people over there, meaning us over here, are taking to getting their education in foreign countries such as France, Spain and Italy. They are becoming infected with popery and other ills and becoming very evil subjects indeed. So to remedy this horrendous state of affairs, she built Trinity College. She built it herself, in fact. She was often seen digging the foundation. Great, powerful woman, way ahead of her time. But specifically at the time as a school of divinity for the training of young Protestant ministers, she was very concerned that the whole Protestant ethos, which had been built up very carefully around the Dublin area, was being eroded by the effects of the Counter-Reformation in Europe. And she felt that a school of divinity was the ideal way to counteract that. It's long since, of course, a full university. The stone behind you there marks the spot where the original building began, on the site of an old Augustinian abbey. That's why they built this bell tower, or campanile as they call it, to commemorate the spot. They say the only time the bell up there ever rings is if a virgin passes underneath. So it's obviously not working tonight. Hasn't been heard in years. But the early students of Trinity had a very long day. They had to begin work at 6 o'clock every morning and had a very busy day of lectures and prayer meetings, with regular visits to the two cathedrals to the west of here, St. Patrick's and Christ Church. But all this religious activity did not really endear them to the people of Dublin. They were far better known for their debauchery and carry-on in the streets and the taverns than they were for their religious studies. And by the time Oscar Wilde arrived here in 1872, things had not changed much for the better. They have not changed much for the better since then, apparently, either. But Oscar had little time for his fellow students here. He wrote about them once and he said, "They think of nothing but running and jumping. They vary these intellectual pursuits with bouts of fighting and drinking. And their souls, if indeed they have souls, they divert with coarse amours among the barmaids and women of the streets. They are in fact simply awful." Oscar was born just behind the college on a street called Westland Road, but he didn't graduate from Trinity. He left after 2 years in 1874. He had come under the influence of one of his professors, Dr. John Pentland Mahaffey, who was later to become a famous provost of Trinity himself. And Mahaffey took Oscar aside one day and he said, "Well, Oscar, you're not quite clever enough for us here at Trinity. We have to send you down to Oxford." Which was a sneaky way of telling Oscar he'd won a scholarship to Magdalen College, Oxford, which he had. And he spent 4 very happy years at Oxford University, graduating in 1878, calling himself a formed man. He then went straight up to London, and for the next few years he moved in high, polite society there, but he never really had enough money to carry on that kind of lifestyle. So in order to raise some, he went off on an extensive lecture tour of the United States. It was 1882. Oscar had just published his very first book of poetry, but as the critics of the day said, everybody wrote this book except Oscar Wilde. It was so derivative. But he was a fairly thick-skinned man in those days at least, and this didn't bother him, so off he went to the United States. He was lecturing on his 2 favourite subjects, art and aesthetics. And we want you to remember that for your quiz later on. Well, that's a clue. At one point in his journey, he found himself in Denver in Colorado. Is there anybody here tonight from Colorado?
Oh,
Excellent.
you're safe.
From Denver, he was invited to a town called Leadville, which I believe is the highest town in the United States. It's over 10,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains, and I guess that's high enough for anybody. In those days, apparently, it was a silver mining town, and for a population of 15,000 people, it had 249 saloons and 28 brothels. Very like the average Irish village today. Everyone was having a good time. Oscar was invited one evening to lecture on art and aesthetics to the local miners, which must have proved an interesting evening indeed. Certainly Oscar found it so. He wrote a letter back to his friends in London to describe the evening's events, and he's here in person to tell us all about it. Oscar!
Thank you, Dad. While I was lecturing at Denver, I received a message that if I continued on to Leadville as I intended to do, the harsher spirits of that wild mining town would be sure to shoot either me or my travelling manager. I wrote back and said nothing they could possibly do to my travelling manager could intimidate me, and I went. It was a gloomy, jolting journey on a gloomy, wet day, 150 miles through the Rocky Mountains, until we arrived at last at a snow-covered, cheerless station. At my lecture the following night, a baby was present, and when I said there is no better way of loving nature than through art, the baby burst into tears. I said I wish the juvenile enthusiast would restrain its aesthetic raptures, and all was silent. The rest of my audience consisted mainly of silver miners, whose huge sombre hats, scarlet shirts, and high boots reminded one of 17th century cavaliers. Indeed, they were the only really well-dressed men I'd encountered since my arrival in the United States. There they sat, row upon row, them enormous, powerfully built men, silent as the grave, their eyes watchful, brawny arms folded over muscular chests, a loaded gun strapped to each swelling thigh. I lectured these delightful fellows about the early Florentine schools of painting, and they slept as peacefully as no crime had ever stained the ravines of their mountain home. I showed them pictures of Botticelli, and the name would sound to them like some newly invented drink, roused them in their dreams. I read them passages from that great wit and adventurer Benvenuto Cellini, and he proved so popular that they asked as one man why the hell I hadn't brought him with me. I explained that Benvenuto had been dead for some years, which elicited the immediate response, "Well, who shot him?" After my lecture, they invited me to supper, and having accepted, I found I had to descend a mine in a rickety bucket in which it was impossible even for me to remain graceful. At the bottom of the mine, we sat down to the banquet, the first course being whiskey, the second whiskey, the third whiskey. The amazement of the miners when they discovered that art and appetite could go hand in hand knew no bounds. And when at last I lit a long, cheroot cigar and quaffed a couple of cocktails without flinching, they cheered me, into the silver fell in glittering dust on the roof onto our table. Yours ever, Oscar. A little ironic postscript to that story was that Oscar was brought down to the mine shaft to get him drunk on purpose. But what the miners didn't realise was that Oscar was even more used to drinking than they were. At the end of the night, he was the only one sober enough to operate the primitive machinery in order to get them all back up to the surface. The following days, he was leaving town. He saw a couple of the silver miners across the street, and he called over to them. He said, "Never mind an Irishman's supper unless it has 5 courses. 3 simply will not do." We'll leave Oscar sobering up there. Just 2 quiz questions associated with him. The first we gave you a strong clue to. On what 2 topics was he lecturing in the United States? And the second question is, during his time here at Trinity, he represented the college at a particular sport. And you have to tell us what was that sport. It's not an obscure sport. You all know it. The only clue I'll give you is it is not a sport you would automatically associate with the personality of Oscar Wilde as we think of it. Okay? Now, of course, Oscar Wilde wasn't the only famous writer to come to Trinity. There have been many here over the centuries. Among them, Jonathan Dean Swift, author of Gulliver's Travels. Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, was also a student here in the 19th century. Samuel Beckett was both student and lecturer here for a short time. And also Oliver Goldsmith, who came here as a scholarship student in 1745. But being a scholarship student in the 18th century wasn't very pleasant, because in order to show they weren't paying fees to the college, they had to wear big red hats. And it meant they could be picked out by any fee-paying student around the grounds and made to do any sort of menial task they wished. So it wasn't very nice, but he did survive it, and he went on to become quite prolific. Possibly most famous for his play She Stoops to Conquer, his novel The Vicar of Wakefield, and his poem The Deserted Village. But he also wrote 2 far more famous works of literature, if you could call them that, and that is 2 Mother Goose nursery rhymes. He was commissioned to compile the first book of Mother Goose nursery rhymes. And this he did. He went around the country collecting folk rhymes. But as the deadline approached, he realised he was a couple of rhymes short of the quota, so he decided to make a few up. and they've since become two of the best-loved nursery rhymes in the English language. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to tell us which two nursery rhymes were written by Oliver Goldsmith. You definitely know them. They feature in any top list of 5 or 6. If you had an English-speaking childhood, well, no problem. If you did not have an English-speaking childhood, tough. No. Don't worry about it. Just sit next to somebody in the next pub who did and ask them to list you off half a dozen nursery rhymes in English who have as good a chance as anybody else. But just very briefly, among some of the modern writers to come through Trinity, included the writer Brian Keenan, whom some of you may remember was held hostage in Beirut for nearly 5 years in the 1980s. And on his release, he wrote a wonderful book about his experiences called An Evil Cradling. And he was writer in residence here at Trinity for 2 years. And also Brendan Kennelly, one of our foremost contemporary poets, has been professor of modern English here at Trinity for over 25 years. In fact, he just retired in the summer. And he was as known at one point for his drinking as he was for his writing. But he's been off the drink now for about 15 years. He gave it up in his doctor's advice. His doctor said to him, Brendan, if you don't stop drinking, I'm afraid you've only got about a year to live. And as Kennelly himself said later on in a television interview, he said, I had to think long and hard about that. A man could drink an awful lot in a year. He didn't give it up, but he's still with us. Now, I think it's about time for our next pub stop. We're heading off to O'Neill's of Suffolk Street. O'Neill's has great associations with the college. Almost everybody that's been through here has been through there. There's been a pub on the site for over 300 years, but it's only been in the present family since the 1920s, so they're kind of blow-ins really. We won't hold that against them. It's quite a large pub. It's got 5 bars downstairs and 2 upstairs. We're going up here for 20 minutes quality drinking time only. We'll not be talking or performing in the pub or sitting in any particular place. It's just your chance to go to the pub, relax, spread out, and have a drink. At the end of the 20 minutes, we'll make an announcement over the public address system saying it's time to meet back outside and head off to our next stop, which, as it happens, is directly across the road from the pub in an old church, St Andrew's Church, which is now the Tourist Information Office. Some of you may have been there earlier on today. So when you hear the announcement, head straight across the road to the church and wait for us there. Now, for some reason, you don't hear the announcement, and you may not, depending on how well it's working tonight.
Do you remember them? Quiz question. There is, from the beginning of them.
I think there's about 4 at this point.
Right.
In the very beginning,
Oh, the first was the day.
Born, which I think is
Oh, okay, you're right. The year James Joyce was born.
1906? 1806.
At least 1880. That was Beckett or something. Around Easter.
Oh, okay, so maybe it was
What day was it around Easter? See, we're not going to do well.
We're not going to do well. We're going to fail.
Can't remember the question.
The second question was which Beatle helped write,
Oh, I know
or
this.
which Beatle, wasn't it which Beatle,
Did this slip over?
yeah, which Beatle helped
Also involved.
is the writing of Calvin. Okay, got it.
I think it's Paul McCartney.
Alright. What about, yeah, but what about that other guy, the one who just died?
George Harrison. I think Paul McCartney.
What about John Lennon? We'll find out, won't we? Then the other question, I'll just explain it to the audience so that people at home can play along with our video and not get bored. And the next question is, I think, what nursery rhymes?
Oh, right. There's 2 nursery rhymes.
Nursery rhymes that were written that are very
Written by
famous.
somebody.
And they're like, if you're a group in an English-speaking household, you should know these off the top of your head. And I'm like, Little
Can't name
Rabbit
any. Not a nursery rhyme.
Little Rabbit Foo-Foo is all I got. Sorry.
I don't think that's one of the Mother Goose.
I think that's what we have 3 questions, and we're going to be quizzed at the end. So
I thought there were 4. I thought you had 2 for each
I
one.
think.
I can't remember.
3, so.
Okay, let's see how we do.
This was actually St Andrew's Church. A Protestant church has been here for several centuries. And it was closed about 12 years ago because the congregation had dwindled to about 3 people. Now they briefly thought of making it into a nightclub. They changed their mind about that and became the Dublin Tourism Office instead. And the irony of that is now something like 1.2 million people come back into the church every year. But this site has got an even older association than that of the church, because it is on this site where the Vikings, who came to Dublin over 1,000 years ago, built their council chamber, which they called Thingmuta. The Vikings had 2 major settlements along the River Liffey, just behind where we are here. And this is where they did all their government business in the early Middle Ages. Monarchs of all they surveyed, until we eventually kicked them out, and now they only return as tourists. We got any Vikings? The audience, any Vikings? Not that they wouldn't be very welcome.
We're all friends now.
Moving swiftly on. The next piece we're going to do for you is from a much-loved Dublin writer by the name of James Plunkett, who wrote this play initially as a radio play entitled Big Jim. It then became a stage play called The Risen People, and was eventually turned into a television series called Strumpet City, his novel Strumpet City. Now it's set during what was known as the 1913 lockout, which was a major strike here in Dublin. During the early part of the century, a very small group of businessmen, led by a man named William Martin Murphy, owned and controlled virtually everything here in Dublin. All the pubs, hotels, restaurants, the small businesses, the docklands, everything. And the conditions for their workers were absolutely appalling. One of the things William Martin Murphy used to do is he wouldn't pay his workers in cash. He paid them in the form of a little chit, which they could only cash in one of his many pubs throughout the city. This is just one of the things which led to the strike. Now, along at this time, a Labour leader from Liverpool, a man by the name of James Larkin, came over to Dublin in order to start up a union. But this he did with another great Labour leader, James Connolly, who incidentally was one of the leaders of the 1916 uprising here in Dublin. But the union met with fierce opposition from the employers, particularly William Martin Murphy, who declared that any of his workers who joined Larkin's union would be locked out of his job, which is exactly what happened. Tens of thousands of men went on strike during the winter of 1913-1914. The strike lasted for 8 long cold months. The workers lost the action. They had to go back to their jobs at the end of that time under even worse conditions. That is, those who could get their jobs back. Many of them couldn't. Many of them were forced out onto the streets to beg for a living. Still more were forced to take the King's shilling, as was known, which meant that they had to go off and join the British Army and fight in World War I, that being the only other option left open. So it was a particularly bad time in Dublin, caused an awful lot of suffering for the men and their families, and also left a lot of bitter memories, not least because the Catholic Church, for the most part, tended to side with the employers, which didn't go down very well, as you can imagine. This little piece we're going to do for you is a small section from the play The Risen People, and it takes a somewhat light-hearted look. You'll be happy to hear after that tragic story. It takes a light-hearted look at 2 of the characters who are begging on the streets during the lockout. One of them is called the Toucher Hennessy. Now, a toucher in Dublin parlance is a character who doesn't normally beg on the streets. What a toucher does is he scrapes together the price of 1 pint, which he calls the entrance fee to the pub. He goes into the pub, buys his 1 pint, sits down beside you, and proceeds to agree with absolutely everything you say, hoping to touch the price of a 2nd pint, and so on and so forth. That's what he normally gets his night's drinking done. This particular day, Toucher doesn't have the entrance fee to the pub, and is forced to beg in the streets for us with another character who's well versed in the art of street begging, called Rasher's Tierney. There, Rashers!
Yeah, here. Excuse me, you're lovely, but you're in the way.
Now, Rasher's claim to fame is that he can spot the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic at 200 yards. Now, that's very important when you're begging in 1913 Dublin, because if you see a Protestant coming, you sing a Protestant hymn. If you see a Catholic coming, you sing a nationalist rebel ballad. And Rasher's always knows the right story to tell and the right song to sing. Now, we take up the story where the 2 of them have been begging on the streets all morning. It's cold, it's wet, it's miserable. They've had absolutely no luck whatsoever. And Rasher's has just finished singing a very mournful song, which leaves the 2 of them even more depressed than they were to begin with. Well, that was a sad class of a tune.
It's a sad class of a day.
Sad class of a world.
Ah man, no customers either. Business is in the doldrums.
We're a bit far off the beaten track.
If we chance any closer, the police might catch us.
And if we stick it out here, the customers won't see us.
They use this as a shortcut now and then, so do what I told you. You keep a look out that side and see if anyone is coming. I'll watch this. Now, if he's poor, don't bother. If he's rich, see is he a Catholic or a Protestant.
How the hell am I supposed to know that?
Use your loaf! It's disastrous to pick the wrong tune. Here, if he looks fat, he's a Catholic. Of course, Protestants are sometimes fat too, but they never look it. If he's thin, he could be either. If he's thin with a long face and a sharp nose, that's a Protestant. If he's thin with a long face and a nondescript kind of nose, that's a Catholic trying to look like a Protestant. Well-off Catholics often do. In that case, look down at his feet and see is he wearing gaiters.
By the time I do all of that, he'll be at home having his tea.
Here's somebody now. It's a Catholic. Amen.
nation once again. How's it going? A nation once again. No bread, no butter, no tea, no sugar.
Well, if that's a Catholic, it's a non-practicing one.
When he came close, he put me in mind of Buckshot Forrester. It's no wonder Parnell gave up in tides. Parnell forever, old Buckshot the bugger, old. Take him to the slaughter yard and hang him out by leather, old. We're breeding them still. Throw a stone, that's random, and you hit another informer like Carey or another pig at the forge.
You know, I used to see piggott swimming in Kingstown Harbour when I was a youngster. Kind old gentleman who used to look with a white beard. He shot himself somewhere. In Madrid, was it?
In the head, I was told.
Maybe now that they're clapping Larkin in jail for 7 months, things might get back to normal.
As far as Rashers is concerned, things is already back to normal. I've no work and I've no money. I've been trying the ash bins, but there's damn all in them
I
either.
want to be up at the crack of dawn to find anything worthwhile in an ash bin these times. I tried the four sides of Merrion Square one morning. No use. Every one of them rifled.
It's the early bird catches the worm. Any story your side?
Not a story.
Not a story this side either,
Yeah, the tide's gone teetotally out. The only thing you do about a run of bad luck is sit tight till it passes. I remember the day this one started. It was in September and I was above the Phoenix Park searching for a bit of watching water. It was hot and I was parched with the thirst and I had no money. If there'd been a pond handy, I had a chance to drink it. Then I saw this old gentleman in the seat with his toddler beside him, his grandchild I suppose. He was after handing the kid an orange he was after peeling for, but the kid let it fall to the ground. Now it rolled a bit in the grass and stopped. Well, the kid was for climbing down after, but the old man wouldn't let him. No, dirty, says the chiseler. You mustn't pick it up, I'll go and buy you another one in a moment. So the kid stayed where he was. The orange did likewise. I hung around, you know, waiting for them to go. But do you think he would? Instead he starts playing Jip, me little horsey with the kid.
Chip, your what?
Jip, me little horsey.
I never heard of it.
It's a game you use kids with. Put them on your knee, right, you jig them up and down and go, Jip, me little horsey, Jip again, sir, Henry, my Stumptown tree's content, sir. So the kids can straight gas.
Holy Jesus.
Anyway, there was the orange, and there was me with the tongue of me head swollen with the drought. But he wouldn't go. He kept it up for ages. Jip, me little horsey, Jip again, sir.
We had that bit. Get on with it.
Yeah, well, the next part is painful. Cry like a kid still. He got up to go, right? He turned around to take the kid with the hand. Didn't see the orange and walked on it. It was about 14 stone weight and he made shag and marmalade of it. There was not left. That was the beginning of September and I haven't had an hour's luck since.
The baskets up in St. Stephen's Green can be worth a try. When they're in season, that's usually around July or August. Now, you'll always get a bit of fruit. You could be lucky though. Pick up a ham sandwich. This time of the year, the hotels and restaurants is good. There's Jury's, Janet's, the Dolphin, the Shelburne. I prefer the Imperial myself. There's a better class of people goes in there. The only drawback is it belongs to William Martin. Here, it's only stir your side.
Not a sign.
It's not a sign this side either. Is all dead or what?
Hold, we're too far off the beaten track. Wait a sec, here's somebody now. Catholic priest.
Priest, right, we give him faith of our fathers. Faith of our fathers.
It's not a priest, it's a Protestant clergyman.
Oh Jesus, think of a Protestant hymn quick.
Oh, what's that? Salvation Army when throw the life line.
The very thing. 2, 3, 4. Throw the lifeline across the dark wave. There is a brother whom someone should save. Somebody's brother who then shall die. To throw the lifeline is called to shine. You mean old bastard!
There you go, lifeline from that quarter.
I'm a pain in me drawers. I'll see you tomorrow. Good luck, thank you. Thanks very much. Well, I'm glad the rain is held off for the snow or whatever, because our next pub is about a half-hour walk to the west of here. But you get a great sense of Dublin as you're strolling along. I'm just kidding. That's a lot of gloom descending. It's just up the street. Don't worry, we don't want to walk that far either. It's called the Old Stand now. It's of more historical interest really than literary interest, because it was one of the favourite pubs in Dublin of Michael Collins when he was alive. Many of you will be familiar with something of the Michael Collins story. He was the leader of the Irish War of Independence between 1919 and 1921. He used the pub for a couple of reasons. One of his secret headquarters at the time was at number 3 St Andrew's Street. That's the street just beginning here. Number 3 is on our left as we go around the bend. It's now the site of the Trocadero restaurant, and it's just 50 yards or so from the pub. The pub is also just a few minutes walk from Dublin Castle, which was the headquarters of the British administration in Ireland, and they had lots of agents moving in and out of the castle. They used to meet in the back room of the pub and exchange information or whatever. But your next quiz assignment, the A word, is to find out what the pub was called at the time. It was not called the Old Stand, obviously. Now there are two ways you can do it. You can bribe a barman. There are several barmen, however. Only one of them tells the truth. and of course he doesn't work on Thursdays. But the sure way is to find on one of the walls inside the pub a famous old photograph. It's the photograph of part of a funeral cortege passing the pub. The funeral was that of a man called Kevin O'Higgins. He was the first Minister for Justice and External Affairs of the Irish Free State. He was assassinated in 1927, but he'd been a great friend of Colin's and had spent a lot of time in the pub himself, so they decided to pass by. And it's a wonderful photograph of his old friends outside paying their last respects, and the name of the pub at the time is clearly visible in the photograph. Now it's not, as someone suggested one evening, Wines and Spirits. No. It's the bit in the middle. Now, we're up here for quality drinking time again, you'll be delighted to hear. Another 20 minutes where you don't have to listen to us. Now, it's a very different pub from O'Neill's. It's a much smaller pub. There are just two sides to it. Two barrooms, if you like. The PA system actually wasn't working tonight in O'Neill's. That's why nobody heard an announcement. We're struggling feverishly on your behalf, but it didn't work. What we have is that we don't rely on technology in the next pub. What we have is much more effective usually than a PA system. In the middle of the bar we have a ship's bell. And a ship's bell normally works when you ring it, as you probably know. A ship's bell is a ding-dong bell, by the way. It's not a buzz-buzz bell, in case you've never been on a ship. So when you hear the bell ringing, ask not for whom it tolls for thee, as you must meet us outside. It's also worthwhile looking at the other customers. They often look at their watches and panic. It's closing time so early, man! Okay, follow Jessica, please. Okay, we're going to have the quiz. Don't worry, it's a ruthless quiz. You just shout in your answer if you think you know, okay? Don't put your hand up, don't be timid, don't be shy. We make the rules up as we go along. We do not anticipate argument. Good. Now, the first question was on what day was Beckett born?
Good Friday.
Friday here and there at the same time. And yeah. Okay, and where are you from? Southampton, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, Southampton and
New York
and Liverpool. Yeah, that's a good mix. Get the ball rolling. Well done. Yes, Good Friday it was. And yes, which Beatle worked in Oak?
George Harrison.
Paul McCartney.
John Lennon and John Lennon.
Oh, okay.
Paris and New York in the lead. John Lennon, yes, well done, Paris. Yes, and in what year was Joyce born?
1882.
1882 here and 1882 there. Yeah. Did you say that?
Yes, I did as well.
You did as well, yeah. I heard you. I heard this lady. You're in New York, you're
Southampton.
It's not a team sport. But Paris has got 2 and New York has got 1 and Southampton has got 1 for that lady there. Okay, well done.
2. We've got one.
What did I just say?
Not a team sport.
Who makes the rules?
The judge.
I remember you. Hold on to that point you have.
You've got it in Galway.
Okay, and yes, who is cast to play Pint?
Cary Grant.
No.
There's American.
I'll have a guess at James.
Clark Gable.
Yes, he said.
Yes, Clark Gable. You all have the right. South Africa have opened their accounts. I say it very well. Clark Gable it was. Well done. And then we went to Trinity. Oscar lectured on what subjects in America?
Art and
aesthetics here, I think Southampton just beat out 2 points for Southampton.
Thank you.
And no, I can hear you. You're in my left ear.
Just keep chatting, Bobby.
There you go. Okay, that's close enough. Yes, and Oscar represented Trinity at what sport?
Rugby. Football.
Cricket.
Shinty. Debating.
Boxing.
Boxing.
Yes.
Of course he did, yes.
Suffolk in England, of course, yes. Yes, he was a heavyweight boxer. He was a big man, he was over 6'3". I think that's how he may have met the marks of Queensbury, which is
He didn't play cricket, as you know, because of the indecent posture.
That's correct.
Oh, I
He was a peasant.
All right, yes, well done. So Suffolk have opened their account. And Oliver Goldsmith wrote what nursery rhymes?
Baba, black sheep, Mary had a little lamb.
She did, but that's not it.
Little Boy Blue.
London Bridge.
Jack and Jill.
Jack and Joe.
Jack and Jill was one, South Africa.
Ding Dong Bell.
Humpty Dumpty.
Oh, Little Hubbard.
Did somebody say something?
Jack B. Nimble.
Hickory Dickory Dock the Mouse. That's 2 points for yourself, isn't it? Yes, indeed. Hickory Dickory Dock and Jack and Jill were written by Oliver Goldsmith, so you can get as drunk as you like tonight and quote a famous Irish writer. Hickory Dickory Jill, try well, believe it. Okay, what was the original name of the old stand?
Monaco.
Was that you? That was you. Yeah. New York, 2 points. That's 2 points for yourself. Okay, and can anybody remember the name of the writer that Jessica has just featured?
Mary
Lavin and Lavin at the back. That's New York as well, isn't it?
New York, yeah.
Well, 2 points for this man from Suffolk. So we have several people on 2 points. So we're going to have a shootout between those 2 people. We have the gentleman from Suffolk, we have the lady from Southampton. We have New York. We have Southampton. We have Paris. And we have the gentleman from New York as well. Okay. That's it. That's everything. Sorry about that. No, they have a point each. You did very well. Well done, sir. You're not qualified for life.
You've got the t-shirt.
Thank you.
I don't know how you get anybody's around for a few days and you're looking for another tour. We highly recommend the historical walking tour, which takes place